It doesn't take a genius.
Welcome, everyone, to It Doesn't Take a Genius. This very special episode is our holiday special and our very first live guest in person. And so the name of the podcast, as you know, is It Doesn't Take a Genius. Well, Mark and I, we kind of live up to that mantra. So we went and got one to be our special guest. And so we have with us someone who's been very influential in our professional and personal lives, someone who was a practitioner of DISC and brought it to help bring it to the masses, and somebody that we just admire greatly. So without further ado, we would like to welcome to the show Pamela Cole.
Thank you. What a pleasure for me to work with two men that I have great fondness for and had almost a decade now of collaborative conversation that's been rich and part of our professional development. Yeah.
Boy, we're glad to have you here, and we know that the three of us have wonderfully interesting conversations, and we hope our listeners will as well. So I'm going to throw it over to Mark to kick it off.
Well, boy, you really caught me off guard there. I hadn't really considered that it's been about a decade, and that would explain why we've been talking for a half hour on Zoom before we pressed record, and have followed and we knew this would happen. About 12 different rabbit trails have already been explored a little bit. So we'll try to stay on task for this, because we really do think that this is a timely message. Pamela has some knowledge and wisdom to share here about the holiday season that we're kind of going into, on top of the pandemic, on top of other news stories that let's not mention, and just move on past it and acknowledge that it's just kind of a hard time, and we're all managing some negative feelings. So Pamela, we know a little bit of what you're going to talk about, but I know we're going to be learning too. But I want to throw it to you to just sort of set up the concept of this thing that could help us manage some of these negative feelings. So
Usually what I bring to people are things that have been very significant to me, and this certainly is an area that's been very significant to me. Having hard feelings, I felt was something that just happened. We talk about the big four: sad, mad, glad, and scared.
Right.
And, I thought I was struck with these feelings. Early on in my life, I just thought, I would say that, I went to sleep fine. I was just fine when I went to sleep. And I woke up just struck nuts. And that's kind of scary, to feel like you are the victim of your own thoughts and feelings, and you have no control over them. Like, at any moment, I could go into this state that I don't know how it happened, and therefore I don't know how to get out of it. Because the other thing I thought was they were permanent. In the middle of a feeling, it can seem, some people say we go into infant time. And when you're an infant, everything is forever, because you don't have enough experience for it not to be forever.
Yeah.
And both you have kids, and Mark, you have young kids, so the experience of, I'm sure,
who are actively waiting for Christmas.
We are actively waiting for Christmas. But even falling down with a skinned knee, the pain's going to last forever. The disappointment is going to last forever. The fight with the sibling going to last forever. Yeah. So bringing these resources online and having the skillfulness to bring them online is a task of adulthood and a maturing in terms of adult development theory that doesn't get completed for many of us, or it gets significantly delayed. And there are some reasons it gets delayed. It gets delayed perhaps because there isn't adequate parenting. Neither parent was very good, in my case, with regulating feeling, and so they couldn't teach what they didn't know.
Yeah.
I grew up in an era where we didn't talk about these things. I mean, I love that we have that wonderful Disney movie about feelings. Inside Out.
Inside Out, yes.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Pixar films.
Yeah, so many things that children are getting a chance to learn younger about feelings. So the most important concept here is thoughts shape feelings, not the other way around. So when I thought I was just struck by my feelings, it was because I didn't see the link between my thinking and my feeling. There actually had been some thoughts, and I didn't see the connection between events and how I thought about them, and then how I felt about them, and how it shaped my behavior. So being taught as an adult, these skills was really important, is that I wasn't a victim of my feelings, and that I wasn't a victim of events. Now, Mark, I'm going to count on you as the scholastic that you are.
Oh my.
Talk about, this is not a new concept. It may have evolved in our modern practice starting about the 60s, which is certainly my era and my generation started introducing this, but it is foundational to positive psychology. And positive psychology is not the original positive thinking of the power of positive thinking, but the emerging school of psychology since 1990, when Martin Seligman introduced positive psychology.
Yeah.
So it's based on living well. And the premise was, we have spent all this time in psychology, over 100 years of exploring mental illness. And what we haven't put time and resources in is to mental wellness. What helps somebody be high functioning? This is when we started learning about the resilience of people, and that circumstances didn't shape outcomes exclusively. Just because you're born into some hard circumstances, some people are able to bounce back, be resilient, have hard things happen to them, and others are not. And the original research was to see, is it constitutional? Is it in the brain structure? And that pretty much never came to fruition. That it is something that is teachable. And that's what's really hopeful, is that it's teachable. If some people are just born that way, well then, if we don't have luck of the draw, there you go. But the fact that it's teachable means I can take conscious control over my thoughts, that then will shape my feelings, that then will shape how I behave in the world, how I behave in relationship, how I interact with what needs to be done.
Boy, you're making me think of a lot of classical examples of where this might play out. Frankly, Paul, the passages in the epistles of Paul talk about, taking every thought captive. I'm gonna conquer that thought and not let that thought run away from me and turn into something negative. And maybe what I said is slight blasphemy if I'm just turning it into a psychology of the moment, but just go with me on that.
There's actually quite brilliant psychology in Scripture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the book of Philippians, it's a letter written while he's in chains, and it's a letter about joy and, all the things you should be meditating on, all the things that are praiseworthy and commendable and have excellence in them. So that was my first thought, but I think you're probably going back even earlier, that Plato has some examples here. The one that for me came to mind was his concept of the republic, and that's sort of a metaphor for what really goes on in your body, and that the head should be the ruler, the philosopher king, so to speak, and it should be controlling all these passions that you have in your chest and your heart. And you need those passions. You need a good guardian who gives you some courage and some energy behind what you're trying to do, and certainly it should have some control over all those other desires and instincts and so on that you might have. But the head kind of has to check the heart and have the heart serving the head instead of the other way around, is how Plato would have said it. I don't know if that...
Well, you bring up two parts. That's the positive use that we're going to talk about, which is cognitive reframing.
Okay.
That Paul was talking about as well. But the head actually drives our passions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go back to when you talked about lizard brains.
Yeah.
So part of what we have, and this is the real breakthrough of the last 50 years, is we have, our reptilian brain, our limbic system, that is, no more advanced than, the dogs and cats we live with. We've got the same fundamental wiring. And the prefrontal cortex, which is where we do all of our higher order thinking, doesn't come online until adolescence and until late adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
But if you grew up in conditions that, evoked a lot of trauma, it may not have come online. And one of the things we also know, if somebody starts drinking and drugging young, it does not come online. So that means, we have people who weren't able to fully develop the part that Plato's talking about, is, the reasoning, the discerning mind that can take what is an automatic thought. So automatic thoughts are not as well developed. They're more habitual ways of processing what has happened. So what I think about it, and one of the well-known ones is the always and never. I always have to deal with the angry customer. I never get an easy sale. It always rains on my day off. I never find a parking place close to the store. So that's a very everyday. So but because that's so automatic, I'm not paying attention to it. And what both Plato and Paul were talking about is the fact that we need to practice a form of mindfulness. We need to think about our thinking.
Yeah.
So if I can find that thought, because that thought leads to a mood. If it's I never find a parking place close, that mood is going to be part of the MAD scale. I'm going to be irritated. And I might be sad because I feel a little victimized. Somebody else always gets the good parking places and I never do. That means I'm less than one down. And if I've already had a number of other things that happened in the day, like somebody cut in front of me in line, I didn't get waited on immediately, my call was disconnected when I was waiting, on hold for 30 minutes, I can start creating a story about how this always happens to me and how I'm a loser and I'm a victim. And then, if you look at the graphic behind me, then we see that shift. So all of a sudden now I'm feeling hopeless, helpless. Why try? Because this stuff always happens to me.
Yeah. So
that's an example of where there is what somebody could call a triggering event. But the event, and this is the epic. You got to say the guy's name. Once I get it wrong in my brain, I never can fix it. Always and never.
Oh,
did you hear what I just did? So what I need to do is reframe that. Often I have found that when I lodge an error on pronunciation in my brain, I have to be extra careful when I'm trying to say it the new way, and I have to do a lot of mental rehearsal to get it right, because the first thing that wants to come out is the one that was stored incorrectly. I have similar problems, repetitive typographic problems. Mark, you've proofread some stuff for me. You and your. I hear it in my head, but when I'm typing it, I don't put the R where it's supposed to be your. So, but what's important is the story I tell myself about making that error over and over again. As soon as I go to, you're a loser, now I'm labeling.
Yeah.
Now I start feeling bad. All that happened was I made a typo. But if I use that typo as further evidence on either how life is going to treat me or on, my sense of self.
Your worth.
Yeah.
And the infant part of this is where a lot of this starts, that infant state of, well, this is how it is. Only this current moment forever is all I'm going to have. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And some of us are still in infant time as adults.
Sure.
And I think that, yeah.
Mike's pointing at himself and no comment.
We're in COVID time. We're in COVID time. And, if you're in infant time around COVID, how painful is that?
Well, as you're talking, what I'm imagining is a puppet. So here I am, I'm a puppet, and there's all these strings attached to me. And it's my belief that all these external forces are pulling the strings and causing me, against my will, to do certain things and to feel certain things. And so what I hear you saying is the reality is those strings don't have to be attached to the external world. You don't have
well, the reality is they're not. Is that they're imaginary.
Yes.
So I could metaphorically cut them at any time. But
and we talk about this with salespeople. Just kind of a real life example to tie this back to would be when salespeople, when things don't go well and they beat themselves up, we encourage them not to use any words that have a sense of permanence.
Right.
I'm never going to sell a car, right? I'm never going to land this client. I always have a bad December. And just, these things aren't true. However, you can make them true by leaning into the words that lend them to be permanent.
So thoughts will shape your feelings will shape your behavior.
Mhm.
If I believe it's true, then I'm not going to take the actions. And I also want to talk about what feeling like a puppet with other people pulling the strings leads to, and we certainly have a lot of that going on right now, is then I feel like a victim and I'm looking for somebody to blame.
Yep.
Because how I feel is someone's fault. It's someone's fault. And that can be a full-time occupation, figuring out whose fault it is that I feel the way I am. So
how common is the phrase, "You made me mad"?
Yeah, you made me mad.
It's not true.
And then, when we talk about a sense of empowerment, if I'm convinced that you are the source of my well-being or the source of my ill,
Mhm.
then all my effort is going to be directed toward manipulating you into giving me the goodies and stop giving me the pricklies. So now I've taken all the power out of me and put it in you. And for the you, we can also substitute the world, the much larger place. Well, then I'm confronted with my powerlessness because I cannot shape federal policy. I've been trying for about, 50 years and directly, nobody yet, no president in office has called me and say, Pamela, I know you're a deep thinker. What should I do? And fortunately, it's been about 40 years since I thought they should. So, so that's about, a sense of this wonderful world called efficacy, personal efficacy. So when I'm trying to counter that thought, what's the practice? What can I do in my head? I can say, well, just like I did, I can't shape federal policy. But what I can do is, and then I might need a coach to help me, brainstorm. What are the things I can do? So Mike, talking about your sales example, once I let go of this thought and say, I am feeling that it's more difficult I am thinking that it is more difficult in December.
And so then, the question becomes, so what else can you do?
What else can you do?
And taking it back to a positive sense of control, right? There are things within my scope of my control that I can do to change the circumstances. But somebody sometimes has to be the person externally to say, so what else can you do?
So that's why it's really important. One of the other practices is to have to go to people. And I love what Brene Brown says about who do you go to? How do you discern who to go to? Because many of us know the experience of going to the wrong person. So she says, there's basically 3 people to think about when you're thinking about who to go to. So let's say I'm in a really hard place. My negative thinking has gotten a grip on me. I've been in 100% quarantine. I've basically been in the house since my knee replacement surgery last December. So, every now and then that takes over. So I need some help at that point. I was taught, to break that myth, which we haven't talked about yet, which is the myth of it's weak to ask for help. And this, Brene Brown talks about a lot with armoring. I just want to say, as 2 adult males, I'm glad that you are here in this conversation, because unfortunately in our society, many adult males and more, I'm encountering more and more women, have been taught that it's a sign of weakness to ask for help. So then you can't use this very simple tool I'm talking about if you think it's a sign of weakness. And I was raised that way, and I thought that, and I had to unlearn it. But, say I've gotten really disturbed. I wasn't able to get out of my negative thinking. It's really affecting my feelings. I'm feeling hopeless. I'm feeling despairing. Now, this is a risky set of feelings, particularly for somebody living alone, because I could start feeling suicidal. I know we don't like to talk about those things, but there isn't a one of us that hasn't been touched by suicide.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And the rates were already very, very high. And now with COVID, we're having more deaths from suicide. So, if I'm in this place of hopelessness and despair, suicide actually starts making sense. At least I can stop how long I'm going to feel these awful, intolerable feelings. So because I've been taught to ask for help, then I have to go through my mental list of who to call.
Okay.
Do not do the theme of Ghostbusters because I'm thinking it. So you need to know who to call. So I'm very upset. I'm very despairing. Well, the first person that not to call is the person who agrees with me. Oh, that's right. This is probably the end of your working life. You're probably going to be alone forever because you're never going to be able to get out of the house. So how would you ever meet people? And you can only be on camera so much. And
Poor
so they agree with me. And what do?
Mm-hmm.
I follow through.
Sure.
If I'm on the ledge getting ready to jump and I talk to the person who agrees with me and does my ain't it awful, the world has left you this way, blah, blah. So don't call that person. Do not call that person. Second person is what I call this is Marianne Williamson, I'm borrowing it, is painted pink. Oh, it's not that bad. It'll be fine. You're going to be getting a vaccine, and any day now you'll be able to go out and hang out with your friends, and go to Starbucks and read a book and chat people up and visit your clients who you haven't seen in a year. Any day now it'll be fine. Don't you worry your pretty little head.
Yeah. Pollyanna.
Now me, the way I respond to that, and this is where it's really dysfunctional. Rage. Because it's an empathic failure. It's a total empathic failure. It's somebody trying to paint pink my feelings. They're not hearing them and they're changing them. So that's not who you call. So neither of those, the one that agrees with you and the painted pink person. Or for the Brene Brown empathy video, we started referring to it, that's the deer. The painted pink is the deer.
Yeah.
Want a sandwich?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's our code for that. So the third person, and this is how we can be most helpful to the people that we love and value, and anybody in the world, frankly, is that somebody says, I hear you. I imagine it's been hard to be alone and, quarantined for this period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You seem to have done really well with it. What helped you do really well that you might be able to do more of right now? That's who I need to call. And that's who we need to be when people are reaching out to us. So we need to acknowledge what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge that they have reasons for feeling that.
Yeah.
This is not when I would challenge any distortions in their thinking, right there. The first thing that needs to happen is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
You feel seen, you feel heard. They don't need to be yeah-butted either. If people start yeah-butting me, it's the empathy starts breaking, and because the solutions they're going to come up with are their solutions for their life that work for them.
Right.
What I need to do, and this is how we bring the prefrontal cortex online, you ask open-ended questions. What do you think might work for you? When you're feeling good, what are some of the things you're doing? How are you? So it's all those open-ended questions, except never ask why. First of all, it makes everybody defensive. Why are you feeling that? Boom.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to the past. That doesn't matter. What we're here right now, and that's why this is very much a right here, right now. So they might help me, and then ask permission. Would you be interested in exploring what some of the thinking is that's causing this to be painful?
That's really powerful.
Asking permission.
Yeah, that's really powerful because there's been a progression for that person, right? Who says, yes, you are aware that I'm suffering. You get the fact that I'm suffering. Now let me set
I love
that.
You're using that word. I love that you're using that word because we really need to bring that word out. This is suffering.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I'm thinking to recent conversations I've had, one in particular that was very intense with a client where it was, I didn't do anything. It was about 20 minutes of me just sitting there and letting this person cry. I mean, that I'm so sorry.
So this is the concept called holding space.
Right.
Can you manage your own anxiety and your own discomfort? Because
Right.
many of us have discomfort with other people's feelings.
Yeah.
And be aware, get really good. And this is often true for men.
Yeah.
I want to jump into a solution. I want to fix it, particularly with their intimate partner, as I can't stand my intimate partner being in so much pain, and I want to make it go away.
Yeah.
So that limits the amount of time I can sit in compassionate silence with them.
Right.
And it makes me jump into a solution too soon.
Well, and is that where the why question comes from? So why are you acting that way?
Yeah.
It's kind of pushing it to them, and it doesn't invite you into the conversational space. And so, what's going on in your life, it would be much more powerful than why are you acting that way?
So the key question to ask yourself and to other people when it's the right time in that is, what was the thought you had just before you started feeling that way? Because see, this is one of the hidden thoughts. It's not even, Mike, what's going on in my life.
Mhm.
What is the thought you have about that? So the thought is, it's going to last forever. The thought is, I'm 72 years old and life as I know it is done. And there wasn't a lot of runway left anyway. And that runway that was ahead is, and I'm sure I'm one of millions of elders who are in this space right now. Fortunately, I'm not in assisted living and worrying about, am I in a contagion cage?
Right.
But, for many of my friends who are not able, part of their emotional well-being comes from the relationships with their grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
Who are afraid to visit grandma and grandpa because they don't want to kill them.
Right.
So if we can find that these are the thoughts, the thought is, I don't want to kill grandma and grandpa.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel sad.
Right.
And scared.
Yeah.
And I think the more people can find the sad and scared, the less we'll have to act out the mad.
Yeah.
So my go-to defense for most of my first 40 years of life was to get mad.
Mm-hmm.
Because I certainly didn't want to feel how sad I was or how scared I was.
Yeah.
I was out in a world that wasn't very receptive to women doing what I was doing, and I was traveling globally, and there was a lot of risk and a lot of scared. I was just scared.
Right.
So it was much easier to put on a tough veneer, as our friend Brene Brown talks about, all that armor, those layers of armor, just so I could be in the world. So now we're in small gatherings, all armored. And we're having trouble maintaining our armor because when we're trying before the call, that's the emotional labor, and
it's exhausting.
I have what it takes.
Yeah. Well, this is sort of peeling back the onion to get to what was that automatic negative thought that I had, and you're suggesting that just the very act of doing that is part of this is a tip. if we wanted to boil this down to 3 things you could do during the pandemic, this is one of the tips. Is what was that thought that I had right before this negative wave of emotion?
So one of my thoughts, as I said, was it's going to last forever.
Right.
That's the thought that's driving the emotional pain.
Yeah.
I'm going to be alone forever. And I have other thoughts about, I'm a lousy coach.
Yeah.
I didn't do a good job with that client.
Right.
And I have some that are ancient. They're from my teens.
Yeah.
I'm not good at making friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we need are techniques, first of all, to pay attention. And I'm going to say a wonderful time we live in. I have 2 apps on my phone, and I have the one that just told me I was supposed to stand now. But one of the ones, let me see if I can pull it up. Okay. I have from an app called Mood Fit, thoughts lead to feelings. What are you thinking? Don't judge, inspect. So it's right here on my Apple Watch.
Uh-huh.
And the thought before that was also very helpful. And I've set it to come up, multiple times during the day as a prompt to mindfulness. This has become a big topic in the world. But, once again, Mark, with all your scholastic background, reflection. Reflection and journaling are 2 key practices that I have been doing since the 70s, because that's when I was taught them. And if I wanted to ever get out of feeling struck nuts, I needed to do the discipline of writing about what my thoughts were and how they affected my feelings, and then how they affected my behavior.
So
So, if I think I'm lousy at making friends,
yeah,
then I'm not going to do any of those reaching out activities,
right.
because I've already told myself, what's the point?
So it's so interesting. I had a client recently reconnect with me. He had left the organization that I first coached him at, and so he said it was 4 years ago, and he reached back out to me and he said, that really helped me, and I've advanced in my career, and I know I'm falling back into a pattern, and I don't want to do that. And I said, okay, so what do you want to do? He goes, I want to say things out loud to you.
So that's how he names it. That's
Yeah.
his naming
Yeah.
for it. Love it.
Yeah, and it's led to, he's got a journal going now, just the things that he came up with as he's progressed in this. But it's just fascinating that, and I watched him do it a few times where, he just said, here's what happened at work, and here's how I felt about that. And then he'd go, well, now that I say that, and then he'd immediately start to sort of deconstruct this.
Mhm.
It was an automatic negative thought. So there was an illogical thing at the core there that he had run with and let his emotions take over. I guess that's what you're talking about.
Tell people what some of those thoughts are.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay,
Let's do that.
so they know. Well, there's some that are really my favorite. All or none. I'm an all or none thinker.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having a mentor say to me, do you always have to do black and white? And it turned out that was my process, is, that I have to name the two extremes. Then I can begin with some coaching to fill in between. And that's called shades of gray, helping find the shades of gray between the black and white.
Yeah.
So that's a cognitive skill. Always and never. Mike talked about that. Pervasive and permanent. Pervasive means it's everywhere in my life this stuff happens to me. And
Right.
permanent means always or never. So catching that, and I already had to catch myself once in this podcast, focusing on the negative. And that has a companion, which is discounting the positive.
Mhm.
So, if somebody says to me, well, isn't it wonderful that you have 3 cats with a lot of personality that really love you and entertain you all day? And I know they entertain you because I see all the Facebook posts. Well, that doesn't matter because I don't have any friends.
Right.
You know how that works? And that's why offering people those things as part of fixing them
Yeah.
doesn't work at that stage in the process. And
Gotcha.
Mike, I know you've been through that with your daughter, because we've shared some of those dialogues where you tried to get her to do the at least you have.
Right. Yes.
The one that didn't go well.
There's multiple ones that don't go well.
She's a teenager, of course.
Yeah. So yeah, there was the example. Yeah, she was in her room with her neighbors, and there's 4 siblings, and she's an only child, and they were arguing over who had it the best. And so my daughter was saying, you guys always have somebody to play with, and there's always people in your house, and then one of the kids looked at her, said, look around your room. Taylor's looking around her room. She goes, see all your stuff? And Taylor goes, yeah. She goes, you own all of that. It's all yours. You don't have to share it with nobody. You got it so good. And so, yeah, this realization that yeah, there's always a positive. There's always something to be found in the situation that is a blessing.
Yep. But we have to be ready to go there, because otherwise we're back to the painted pink. If you interject that too early, you're doing painted pink.
And painted pink is lying, right? I mean, that's the difference between seeing a positive side and glossing over that there is a negative side.
Right.
And that's the danger zone, is we're basically lying to them when we say, oh, that's not a big deal.
We're doing something called minimizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Minimizing it. And, people don't, we've got the 2 ends of the binoculars, minimizing and magnifying.
Yep.
So you're minimizing what I'm magnifying. And this is
Right.
a lot of couples fights or
Right.
parenting arguments. Thinking with your feelings. Another really important thing I was taught was feelings are not facts.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, if you're female and you're hormonal, that's probably a really good thing. was probably not gender sensitive, or
Mike and I are not allowed to respond to that, Pamela, but go ahead.
I'm just saying one of the most important things I learned, particularly when I hit my late 40s, was there at least 1 week a month that I probably shouldn't pay attention to my feelings. And I started warning the people around me. You know, it was, there are some things that are physiological. And
Sure.
so learning how to, once again, manage my thoughts, manage my feelings, so I could manage my behavior.
So Pamela, we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, which you haven't seen. It hasn't aired yet.
Yeah.
Airing is what we call it in our fancy podcasting world. But we talked about having a grammar of a topic, that it was important for you to have a way to categorize some things.
Yeah.
And there are different kinds of things in your memory, some of which are sensations that you have. You know, I have a vision of you and Mike right now, and it's in my memory, the way you look right now, but you aren't in my memory. And the same is true of feelings, that I lost a loved one, and I remember that loss, and I remember how sad I was then, but I don't, that doesn't have to be what I have now. It's
Right.
just a memory of how I felt then. And so to be able to categorize that apart and say, that's not a fact that I feel that way, it's a memory of a feeling I had. That's different from the fact of what I observed with my senses, for instance. Those are different things.
Yes, and feelings are feelings.
Yeah,
And
the feeling is a fact, right? It's a fact that the feeling happened.
Yes, it's a source of information.
Right.
It's important for me to pay attention to that information, but it's also important for me to know that that feeling is often generated by the thought I have about myself and the events and the people in my life. So it is the thought that is. So because of the relationship you had with that loved one, and because of all the things that you thought about that loved one, you felt sad at the loss.
Right.
Now, other people could have the same category of relationship, like a grandparent.
Right.
But because there wasn't a lot of memory and thought about this loving person, there wasn't the same experience of loss, which is why, my feelings aren't your feelings. And I can't really calibrate your feelings with my feelings. So this brings us into guilt beating, as Dr. Daniel Amen calls it, or shoulding, as it's more commonly called. And just recently, something was brought to mind is that there's 3 levels of shoulding. I have the shoulds that I do on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I had incessant chatter in my head about what I should be doing. I had a fully internalized critical parent all the time telling me what I should be doing. And it never gave me a break, and there are no days off.
Yeah.
And of course, that led to, because I had all these shoulds, I had a whole bunch for you too. And it was very hard on relationships.
Yeah.
And this is in the beginning, my whole journey with DISC is, different does not equal wrong. Because I had so many shoulds that if you weren't doing it my way, you were definitely not only wrong, but stupid.
Right.
And, so I had to dig out of that from, my 20s, and I have made progress. So, but the 3rd level, which I think is really relevant now, is shoulding about the world.
Oh, interesting.
And shoulding about things like what Christmas should be, what the holidays should be, what Thanksgiving should be, what, and all these shoulds. So once again, it's an idea about reality that is generating some feelings, and those feelings can be feelings of loss or frustration, or just usually not leading to the positive feelings. So looking for the shoulds.
Okay.
Listening.
I was reading an article today, and they were interviewing people from Australia who were just flabbergasted that Americans got together for Thanksgiving. There is no Thanksgiving in Australia. There's no tradition. There's no feelings about being together at this point in time. So to them, it seemed radically absurd that people got together for this holiday and exposed each other to
probably they were saying radically irresponsible.
Yes. Yeah, it didn't make any sense to people who didn't share the feelings about that day.
So they had a should.
Mm-hmm.
That was operating about Americans should have stayed in their little pods with no contact.
Exactly.
And so labeling, when I've taken a lot of craft classes, I'm very Craftula studio classes.
Mm-hmm.
And what would become really toxic is listening to other people talk about themselves and their work. I'm such a loser. I'm stupid. I'm incompetent, I suck, I'll never get this. And it became a joke when I was teaching, when I was in the classes, and then when later on when I started teaching the classes, as somebody would come up with one of those, and somebody who had more exposure with me would say, "Watch out, Pamela's not going to let you say that."
Yep. Yep.
Because I used to try and joke to create some consciousness. It's actually very toxic to be in that soup.
Mhm.
And I'd say, "Hey, Mark, you're talking about somebody." When you had said something about yourself, I would say, "Hey, Mark, I really like that person. So stop talking about my friend that way."
Yeah.
And they, "What are you talking about? What is this wacky thing she's talking about?" And then they begin to get it.
Yeah.
Is that it was such an automatic thought. They
Yeah.
didn't hear their abusive self-talk. So one of the remedies for this is around, would you say that to a dear friend?
I like that. And there was a shorter version of it that you used on me years ago, which was, that's the story you tell yourself. I believe what I said was, I'm not very good with my hands. And you said, that's the story you tell yourself.
Yep, that's
You're
part.
right. You're right. That is the story I tell myself.
Yeah. And now, because I'm learning all this positive reframing, I would ask you all the really good ways that serves you.
Uh-huh.
And all the value ways, because some things maybe I shouldn't give up because they actually serve me really well.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of the devil's advocate, the protagonist.
Yeah.
The paradoxical reasoning, as David Burns calls it. Giving people the paradox of this thing that you're saying is so bad, actually serving you. And Mike, I think you probably can think of a lot of examples from your coaching practice with sales consultants, the way some of their thinking actually serves them.
Oh,
That
definitely.
might not be ready to give up yet.
The encouragement behavior. Going back to what you said, one of the phrases that has recently been important to me was what would you how would you treat yourself the way you would treat someone you love, and would you say those things that you're saying about yourself to someone that you love?
Right.
And the answer is absolutely not. And so yeah, if I treat myself better, then yeah, the outcomes are better.
Yeah, so that's a technique of gaining perspective by reflecting on somebody you value and how you would treat them.
So Pamela, you have 3 more of these ants, these automatic.
Oh, I have to talk about the last 3 because they are the most toxic. So the first one is mind reading. This is a popular couples game. I know what she wants. I know what he's thinking. I just asked a question, but I know what he's thinking. And I have a client that does that all the time. He'll start talking about something. He says, "I know what you're thinking." I said, "Well, then, John, why am I in this conversation?" Because if you already know what I'm thinking, I don't think I need to be in the conversation. And he's like, "What?" But when we hold in our head that we already know what the other person is thinking, first of all, it's disrespectful. But secondly, we don't actually ever get to know another person. We only know what's inside our own head. Once again, that's the story you're telling yourself. The construct we have built of the world in our head, the story about how things are operating, I never explore, so I never get to update my data. And this is something that I had a coach that worked on me tremendously in the 80s, because I was really good at figuring. That was my, one of my defense patterns. And so I wanted to ask somebody out, and I had tickets to an event, and I explained to her why, and now I'm doing also fortune telling, why he wouldn't want to go out with me. And she'd say, well, I said, he said this, he did this, and then this happened, so clearly he wouldn't want to go out with me. And she said, "You don't know that." I think she's being thick. So I say it again. He said this, he did this, and then this happened. He wouldn't want to go out with me. You don't know that. Now I'm irritated because she's just not listening. Clearly, if she listened, she would understand that I am right, and that this logic is right. And, well, he said this, he did this, and then this happened, and that's why he wouldn't want to go out with me. She said, "You don't know that." And then I did my grr and made her explain what it was. And she said, "You think you're doing A plus B plus C equals D. You're actually doing A plus B plus P plus Q plus R equals Z." And you're filling in all this information by mind reading and fortune telling. Then she made me do the hardest thing, which is actually what you do in these things. She made me do the hardest thing. What do you think she made me do?
You had to call the guy.
Hard thing. I had to call the guy. I had to call the guy. That's what you have to do when you're mind reading. You have to check it out.
Mm-hmm.
I had to call him and ask him. And what do you think I learned?
Yeah, you didn't know anything about what he was thinking.
He'd been trying to ask me out for months, but I was so freaking intimidating that he'd never found a way to broach the conversation.
You know, if this particular skill, if this ant, reading this ant was throughout every dealership in the nation, I think we would solve 50% of the problems in the dealership world. Because how many times have we had it? We all work in automotive, all three of us. And how many times have we had somebody send a message to the dealer and the dealer doesn't respond? And they fill in the blanks with, he hates me, he hates this idea, he's unhappy with my performance, I'm getting fired. You know, it escalates and escalates. And one of my general managers is really good about this, helping his people understand. He says, hey, FYI, the dealer's busy. Get in his shoes a little bit here, empathy wise, and think about the fact that he's got a lot going on and he just may not have got to you yet because he's got a lot of stores and there's a lot of things that are going on. And yeah, maybe he should have responded, but he's busy. Maybe that's another explanation here instead of he's judging you and you are bad for all time.
And what I add to that, Mark,
Yep.
is the how do you know question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
You
and
can go
what I think is
conversation.
interesting about human beings is when we don't know, we always fill in the gap with negative thoughts.
Right.
Well,
know,
we
no
fill
one
in the
ever-
gap, and
in
for
Mark-
many of us, it's negative. Yeah.
Yeah. So in Mark's example, I haven't heard back. I sent this neat email to the owner with some important thoughts. I haven't heard back with them. I bet he's taken it in and he's really thinking about it. And he's probably just kind of come up with a great answer and a response. They never think that. They think he doesn't value me. He doesn't think I'm as important. He probably didn't even open it. So nobody fills in the emptiness with positivity.
Mike, would you be open to me challenging your always and never thinking there?
Yes, please.
And your generalization
Yes.
is there are some people who hold such a positive view of themselves and their relationships is they know that the dealer is just busy and waiting for their response.
Mm-hmm.
There are some that do that. And then there are the others that tell the story that you've just said. What the difference is that thought, that little tiny thought about whether I matter, whether other people value me, whether the world is good or evil, friendly or unfriendly. And I would say one of the really biggest areas of thoughts of whether I consider the world friendly or unfriendly. The background of thoughts that I'm making about what has happened, are they thoughts, and this is where I think you're going, Mike, with that see the good in the world? And how can I shift? If this is how we're wired, and we do have some mindset wiring, but if I can be taught a practice to challenge that thinking, to recognize that as a defense, I cultivated not being disappointed. So I've been able to go back and realize that as a very young person, I found, and disappointment is, by the way, one of the hardest feelings for any of us to hold on to. We just want to vomit it out and blame because it's just really painful. So the way to avoid disappointment was to expect the worst. And if you set your mental filter at expect the worst, then, but the problem with that is it limits joy. If I expect the worst, then I'm not going to see good and joy in the world. And then the magnitude of bad stuff is going to take me out. Then I'm going to be back to that hopeless feeling about the world. And, that's something that to this day I have to manage. How much I take in, what sources, and I know you do a lot with, you are the product, you are the sum of, Mike.
Right.
The 5 people you spend the most time with, and now you've upgraded it to this wonderful way that you do it, which is not the 5 people, but the 5.
Yeah, the 5 social media forces that you surround yourself with.
Right. So if I collect all this evidence, that then starts building a worldview. And because I've had to work so hard to shift my worldview from the early programming I had to where I am now, and I'm not wired. I'm a melancholic. I'm not wired for that. I'm not a sanguine. I'm not wired to see things positively. Both of you guys have a lot of sanguine energy. I'm melancholic, you know, in the true wonderful sense of melancholic, but I have to be careful that I don't take myself out. So, you know, I can fortune tell the world as awful things are happening, and they're going to happen more. That, you know, a lot of people are in fortune telling right now. They're just trying to feel safe by crafting the vision of the future that none of us can know. Sorry, never lived through a global pandemic.
Just don't know.
Yeah, just don't know. You know, I don't know what's going to happen with the vaccine. I don't know any of those things. But if I do fortune telling, that will lead to an emotional state. So I was doing some fortune telling about, I'll never get out of the house. I won't ever have friends again. I'll never be able to go to craft camp again, where I love to hang out with artists, and I'll never be able to, you know, all of those things are fortune telling.
Yeah.
So, you know, the technique for that is to keep it in the day, you know, right back, right here, right now. What do I know? That's all I can know. Another technique we call is the hula hoop. The only thing that's controllable, visualize yourself in a hula hoop. You know, you got to swing it around your middle. All that's controllable for me, all that's knowable for me right now is in that hula hoop. If I go much farther out about other people, events, and everything else, I'm in mind reading and fortune telling. And then let's talk about the last one, because it is so toxic and it is so pervasive right now. And back to social media, Mike, you know, really, blame.
I've never done this. Please tell me more. It's such a confusing concept of blaming. I never do this.
Okay, I want you to think, like we talk about, there's two things that people find memorable I've been talking about recently. I'm really against sarcasm, as you know.
Right.
There's sarcasm, and this I borrow from Brene Brown. It comes from the Greek sarkasin, to rip flesh.
Yeah.
Rip flesh. And so for me, sarcasm wounds and confuses.
Yeah.
It's also a sneaky way for me not to deal with the conflict I'm experiencing with another person and take a shot at them, which is a way for me to discharge anger and frustration without owning it and being accountable. So sarcasm and then blame. Blame is vomiting out emotions that I can't tolerate. So I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling hopeless, and I want it to be somebody's fault.
Yeah.
You know, and if you listen for blame in the conversations, you'll hear it everywhere now. And, you know, in those social media environments, Mike, you know, let's find yet another person to blame. You know, and the Australians were blaming us. So, you know, blame adds to nothing. First of all, it's about the past. And there's a wonderful Brene Brown video. You know, I encourage people to go on YouTube about the story she tells about blame and her husband and their relationship, and, you know, how toxic it is to relationship, and how some relationships sadly have eroded to blaming, where often there is one child in the family that becomes the scapegoat. That, you know, in this family, this whole family would be fine if it weren't for this problem child. Now, I know what that's like, because I was that kid. You know, and this family would be fine if only Pamela wasn't so emotional. That was a code word back in the day, emotion. Well, it took me a lot of time to realize that I was doing the emotions for all my family members. You know, if you're empathic, it's kind of hard. And then I had to develop all that armor and barrier and all that, which then I had to melt and get rid of. But and my younger brother picked up the role once I stopped being the problem. I kind of removed myself from the family system. And then my youngest brother became the problem. And for another 30 years, we played, if only Patrick wasn't such a problem, this family would be fine. So, you know, scapegoating happens in organizations too.
Sure.
Both of you can think right away of clients you've worked with where this company would be fine if it weren't for. And sometimes it's a category of people.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the most recently fired individual.
It's one of my general managers said. He said, you know, there's only two things that make this business hard. You guys know this one. There's only two things that make this business hard.
Employees and customers.
Employees and customers. Other than that, this would be an easy business.
Right.
Definitely.
He's getting ready for automated world. Amazon, here I come.
Right.
That I won't have to deal with employees or people or customers.
It's been interesting when being out, talking to people who, who are out there on the front lines of the pandemic and still out in the public realm, uh, it's been interesting to talk to them because they will share all the bad things, right? The loss of income, the stress and all that. However, when you ask them what has been the blessing that's come out of this,
Mhm.
they always have amazing answers.
Oh yeah.
I've gotten outdoors more than I ever had. I've spent more time with my kids than I ever have. We had the opportunity to connect with this group of people in our neighborhood that I really never got to know. And so yeah, they were blaming the pandemic for all the bad things, but they had, many of them hadn't stopped to think about, well, there's all these blessings that came out of the situation if I chose to focus on them.
So Mike, you're talking about one of the key practices. One of the key practices is an active gratitude practice.
Mhm.
Now, since 2013, I've been in an email gratitude circle. So every day I send out a list of what I'm grateful for in the day to this. I do it as a blind copy to 6 or 7, sometimes we've had as many as 10 people on the list. And throughout the day, I get their gratitude lists. And what they do for me is they go, oh, yeah, that happened for me too. Oh, yeah, I could think about that. And they might include a quote or poetry or whatever, but it's been a daily practice since 2013. So I strongly recommend a gratitude. I used to do it in my journal, but I found that it's much more accountability if I do an email circle.
Right.
And that I get to receive everybody else's, which
That's
makes me
neat.
richer. There's some other places to go for that. Happify.com, also an excellent resource for those kinds of things. Greatergood.com, also a resource. Having that daily practice and putting it in place. Another thing that many families do at dinner time are, what was one good thing that happened today? So what we can do is we can teach our children and our friends and our partners how to practice a different level of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a conversation about somebody who recognized they had a behavior of dominating the family conversation at dinner that they wanted to shift, but they did it because of the painful silence. Another person in that same conversation did it because of the toxic conversation. So they kept trying to shift it. And I said, well, there are exercises, and this was going into Thanksgiving, there are exercises. Let's do a Google and find gratitude practice exercises for family, for the dinner table, for Thanksgiving. And we found lots and lots of resources.
Mm-hmm.
So, we live in a wonderful time that we can get access to resources right away. I just was saying that. I'd like to say Dr. Daniel Amen, he has a website, he has podcasts, he has YouTubes, he has a children's book, he has lots of books for adults. Dr. David Burns, also a psychiatrist who is committed to feeling great. Their feelinggood.com has wonderful podcasts, but we can just Google and just pose the question, what tools were shifting my thinking? But we won't look for those if we don't yet know that our thoughts shape our feelings, shape our behavior. So stop trying, yes, I might control my behavior at some level and this is what a lot of the habit work is about, so I don't make things worse with my behavior. But the real change comes from when I pay attention.
Yeah.
So there's 2 apps that I'm using right now. One is called Mood Fit, and they're from iTunes and Android, Google Play. And the other one is called CBT Thought Minder. And it's really designed to start identifying, the negative thoughts, finding it lists, when I have the negative thought, that will give me all the cognitive distortions, like which one of these is playing. And then it has me reframe the thought and write a different thought. And then so I do a mood check before that, and I do a mood check afterwards. And pretty quickly you prove to yourself that there's a mood shift.
This made a difference.
It made a difference.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, I have this lovely reminder. In addition to one that tells me to breathe, and the one that tells me to stand up.
Yeah.
Nagging by an iWatch is a fine art.
Yes. Your iWatch is now your personal assistant for mental and physical well-being.
Well, remember, Mike, I live alone, so I don't have anyone to nag me.
That's true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you had to bring it in through technology.
Yes, that's how I sold myself on this, is that it was to add to my mental, physical, and emotional wellness.
I love it.
Not to mention, it's just
Perfect. Well, we're at the top of the hour,
Mhm.
and this has been absolutely fantastic. And so, Pamela, you've listed tons of resources for us. We'll try to put as many of those in the links as we can, because there's just like you said, some incredible resources to avail ourselves of. And we do appreciate everything that you've done for us, past, present, and future. You're truly a blessing in both our lives.
Yeah.
And with that, let's hear what our snarky announcer has to say about all this.
Oh no, not him.
Oh, yeah.
And that's it. Join us next time when you'll hear Mike say, well, I'm sure he'll say something pithy. Don't miss it. Next time, it doesn't take a genius.
That's good enough.